We will have our second keynote for the day with Will Sarni. Meet Will Sarni, our keynote speaker, is leading the water nature practice and earth finance and has an impressive background. Before Earth Finance acquired Water Foundry, Will was the founder and CEO. He also started Water Foundry Ventures, a venture fund tackling water scarcity, quality, and equitable access. With years of experience advising multinational companies, water tech firms, investors, and NGOs, Will is a true water strategy guru. Will is known globally for his expertise in water strategy and innovation. He hosts a podcast, Distilled by Kachim, and co-hosts the stream with Will and Tom. He also serves on the board of Hydraloop and advises Fidotech, Ketos, through Elements and Watermark. In our online participants, if you have any question during Mr. Sarni's keynote, please feel free to use the chat feature. Following the keynote, we'll hold a brief question session, selecting questions from the chat. So we are really happy to have you on board, Will, and I have first to wish you a really happy Thanksgiving. So thank you to be on board and for your presentation.
Well, thank you very much for the opportunity to participate. Of course, it'd be great to be there in person, but this will have to do. So thank you for the kind words and introduction. And with that, just a few words at the beginning. I love technologies. I love digital technologies in particular. And what I have found is that the more important part is the people side of the equation and strategy. So that's what I decided to focus on in my discussion today. And a little bit of a preview of sort of how I view the world. A little footnote here that, I believe the future of water is digital, decentralized, and democratized, with a small d on the democratized in terms of universal access to data and information. So with that, first slide, please. So, I find it interesting that in the water sector, we're still having this discussion of the value of digital technologies, where in fact, digital transformation and digital technologies have entered other aspects of our lives and are fairly mature in terms of the impact they've had. So we see digital technologies in transportation, healthcare, education, and even in the home. So the built environment has embraced, to some degree, digital technologies related to energy use. And we are seeing the adoption of digital water technology. So moving really towards a smart water home is here and now, and particularly important in places like the American West, which is where I'm located. And we're facing very significant challenges with respect to access to water. So every gallon that we use, we need to be smart about it. Next slide, please. A bit of a snapshot in terms of what's happening in the U.S. This is an image of New York on the left, and this is a city of about 9 million people, and they are using digital technologies to manage their water system, which is extensive and incredibly old. So things like leak detection, asset management, failure, and so on is being managed with digital technologies. That's Las Vegas to the upper right. For the longest time, there was a question of whether, a city like Las Vegas could thrive in the American West, considering aridification, the impacts of climate change, but the Southern Nevada Water Authority has embraced digital technologies and really doing quite well in terms of using AI for leak detection and also asset management. And then this is Tucson in the lower right, which is in southern Arizona. And again, another American city in the desert that is using digital technologies to ensure that assets are managed wisely. and also aging infrastructure can be more efficient in terms of how it's being managed. Next slide, please. So this is a bit of a mashup with the public and private sector in terms of how to think about the water value chain. And the bulk of the work I do is on strategy. So I tend to talk about the value chain for the public sector and the private sector, but again, a particular focus on the private sector. So the way to think about this, at least for me, is what are the digital technologies that you would employ across the entire value chain? And it starts at the watershed. We know that water does not come from the tap, at least most people do. But in terms of healthy watersheds, building healthy watersheds, maintaining those watersheds, we're really seeing digital technologies, everything from satellite data acquisition, analytics, aerial acquisition of data, on-the-ground sensors, coupled with IoT, cheap, inexpensive IoT devices, and also artificial intelligence. Obviously, operations, I suspect that the bulk of the conversation during this forum is focused on that, and there's a lot of technology out there that is being adopted. I would also say that, if you're looking at the private sector that has a supply chain, you're seeing more and more multinationals engage in identifying and deploying digital technologies in their supply chain that they may not own. So in particular, food and beverage companies, not just supporting tech companies, but actually making direct investments in those companies. So again, like to think about the entire value chain. What's the role of digital technologies in transforming these various aspects of how we manage water in a world that's rapidly changing due to the impacts of climate change? Next slide, please. This was a report that came out pre-pandemic a number of years ago, and I went back and took a look at it, and I still believe it's incredibly relevant for this digital transformation in the water sector, however you want to define that. And this was a report from Xylem and International Water Association. And I won't read all the bullets, but sort of the punchline here for me is that you really need to have a very clear business strategy and then think about the role of digital technologies, not the other way around. And I believe that this is often missed in both the public sector and the private sector. As I mentioned earlier, I'm a big fan of digital technologies. It's easy to fall in love with digital tech, but you really have to put it in its proper place in terms of how that supports your overall business strategy, whether you are a utility or whether you are a multinational. So again, there has to be ambition in the C-suite, the board level, clear business strategy, and culture is really important. And Cecilia mentioned that in the previous panel. I caught a piece of that. She talked about collaboration. I will punch that up and say that culture, partnerships, is really the most important part of digital transformation and how we can do better in terms of effective and efficient management of a gallon or a liter of water to address some of the big challenges that we're facing. Next slide, please. Digital transformation, this is from that article. Again, I still believe it's relevant because not every public or private entity is at the same level of maturity. So what we have seen, or at the beginning of a digital transformation journey, is that digital technologies are fairly transactional. They come into the organization through one function, potentially procurement or R&D. There's not a lot of engagement across the organization and not a lot of alignment. Next slide. The transitional phase is where you're seeing more and more applications, not just in terms of leak management and asset management, but also digital technologies that support the workforce and learning that is bundled and typically goes through procurement, which is absolutely essential, but also problematic in terms of how quickly that happens. Next slide. And really a more mature organization is where it is dynamic and fluid. These technologies still need to go through procurement, but they can be identified through a variety of different functions in the organization. High level of collaboration, high level of support, and also a recognition that some of the best ideas come from outside the organization. So collaboration with hubs, accelerator programs, competitors in a pre-competitive space. Certainly see a lot of that in the private sector right now. Next slide. I'll talk a little bit about this book, The Technology Fallacy, and this was co-authored with a former colleague, Jonathan Kopulski. Absolutely love the book. It is a really interesting body of research, and it was, I think they had roughly 10,000 survey respondents, so it was robust, really interesting in terms of the conclusions, and it gets to the issue that digital transformation is all about people. And technologies are great, but if you want to have a successful digital strategy, it has to support the business strategy. So there is a mistaken assumption that digital technologies need to be adopted without really thinking much about the sort of key aspects of culture, the organization, strategy, leadership, and talent, the workforce essentially. So I think organizations acknowledge that digital technology is key, but really not thinking about the organization and the needs of the organization to actually be successful with that digital transformation. Next slide, please. So these are the findings. One of the aspects that I was really fascinated by and surprised by is that respondents prefer to work for a digital leader. I think there's some mistake out there that not everyone in an organization is keen to adopt digital technologies. Certainly sure that that's the case to some degree, but the majority of the respondents said that they actually want to work for a digital leader and want to have the support of the organization to learn, to fail, to build a culture of learning. So I'll get into that a little bit later, but it was really, really interesting. And the fourth bullet down, lack of digital opportunities may increase attrition rates in an organization. Really, really interesting. So when you're thinking about the value of your digital technologies, you need to take that into account, and that's part of the value proposition. Perhaps difficult to factor in, but it's a key issue. Next slide, please. And I'll go through these quickly. How's a digital business different? It's the pace, being agile. It's the culture, the mindset. It's flexible. It improves productivity and so on. So as you think again about the value proposition of digital technologies and investing in digital transformation, these are some of the aspects that come into play here that, again, add a lot of value to an organization. Next slide, please. Value of digital strategy. 80% of the respondents say digital is core to their organization's overall business strategy and success. That's really, really significant in the scheme of things. Next slide. Digital organization and workforce. Again, I was surprised. I'm closer to the right side of this graph here in terms of age. And there's really not a lot of difference between younger generation of the workforce in terms of those people that prefer to work for an organization that is viewed as a digital leader and is mature in their journey. So again, this was one of the ahas in this report, and really most of the respondents, regardless of age group, really want to see a very strong commitment to adopting digital technologies, again, as long as it's aligned with their strategy. Next slide, please. Workforce attrition, I touched on this. More people are inclined to leave an organization that does not have a digital strategy and is not committed to it. Really, really interesting. So again, as you think about the value proposition with respect to people and the workforce, retaining the workforce and growing the workforce and bringing in outsiders into the workforce, having a digital strategy is really, really essential. Next slide, please. Knowing and doing gap, this was another really interesting aspect of the report. Most of the respondents, 87%, believe that digital technologies will disrupt their industry, but 44% felt that they're adequately prepared for that. So there's this knowing and doing gap. You can know that it's really important, but the ability to really transform your industry, your business through digital technologies requires a lot of work and a lot of investment. Next slide, please. Improving digital adoption, obviously sensing, knowing what's out there. There are a number of different ways to do that now. Big fan of hubs, accelerator programs, and collaboration. Again, the people aspect of it. Need to include the velocity of information flow in an organization. I think for a lot of organizations, companies, it's still pretty dated in terms of how information is shared. So you need to be able to increase that. And really the most important part is not assuming that people know the why of it all. They really need to know why digital technologies are being adopted into the organization. I personally believe that analog is no longer an option in a world that's rapidly changing due to increasing demand, aging infrastructure, the impacts of climate change. So the why piece of the puzzle is really key here. Next slide. Sort of a cute way to really frame this, but test small. I don't like the word pilot, but ensuring that you take a bite-sized chunk out of a new technology and fold it into the organization, test it enough, get cross-functional teams engaged, and again, that learning piece of the puzzle here. Be quick and disseminate information very broadly in the organization. Next slide. And I'm almost done here. This is my favorite quote for those of you that know me. Big fan of William Gibson. He's a science fiction writer. And I love this quote. And I love it because I believe it's absolutely true. That if you look around, the future is in fact here. It's just not evenly distributed. So my mission is to identify bits and pieces of the future and socialize it and be a bit of a evangelist in terms of getting the word out, and again, supporting organizations in their digital transformation. So that's the last slide. And again, thank you.
Really inspiring presentation. We have time for 2 questions, and I would like to come back to your last sentence. So you said, and I think it's really interesting, the future's arrived, but it's not evenly distributed. And when we are thinking about the water management in our cities, I was wondering, what are the barriers that we have now, and that could we reach this disruption and to go into digitalization in our water management?
Boy, I believe the biggest barrier is a lack of collaboration. And again, that came up in the previous panel. In the world of corporate water stewardship, collective action is the term of art. So bringing, multinationals together with NGOs in a watershed to collaborate. I personally believe that collective action has not delivered on its promise. So we need to build different platforms. I am a big fan of catalytic communities that have somewhat different attributes, and they're driven by commercial relationships between the stakeholders. So you can build a platform that accelerates sharing of information and problem solving at a faster speed. And, I live in Denver. I'm focused on the Colorado River Basin right now for a lot of reasons. And, we launched a catalytic community, and we're seeing a lot of interest in scaling.
And the second question coming from Mitra Nikpe. So I'm going to read it. The question is, why digital technologies offer great promise for urban water management? What are the potential risks or changes when these systems fail, especially during critical situations like flooding or system malfunctions? And how can the cities ensure that they have backup plans or fail-safe in place to prevent accidents or disruptions?
Boy, that's a great question. I again, big fan of digital technologies, but I'm also a fan of decentralized systems and extreme decentralized technologies. I think that creates greater opportunities to be sustainable and, most importantly, resilient. So it's not just digital, it's digital as an enabling technology for decentralized. And that's not to imply that centralized systems will be completely replaced by decentralized systems, but I do believe we'll move towards hybrid systems going forward. I hope that answered the question. And if not, please share my contact info.
Yes.
Happy to chat.
2 weeks for networking, so you have time. So,
sounds great.
Have a nice day. Thank you very much, Will, for this presentation and for this exchange.